So I feel like I get the impression that a lot of people think I'm just like an absolute brewmaster glazer. Very often, I try to have a really positive outlook on class design, for better or for worse. Even when I think that the class is moving in a not so great direction, or tuning is bad, or it's not performing well, or it's just not a popular class in general, I love playing Brewmaster. But in this video, we're going to talk about a couple of things that I hate about the class. So let's dive in. Now, I'm on the 11.2 PTR. And so the things I'm going to be talking about are going to be in relation to things that have currently existed in the game, as well as are still in existence going into the next patch. So the first thing that I hate about this class actually comes down to the Shado-pan hero talent. Now, for anyone who's been watching my channel for a long time or watches me stream or keeps track of the hierarchies that I do, I am someone who loves Shado-pan. Even if Master of Harmony tends to be a little bit stronger in Mythic Plus, I just like the playstyle of Shado-pan. Now, a very big problem that this class currently has is that it sometimes will not register Flurry Strike procs, which, if you are familiar, is generally a very, very large portion of your damage. For example, in this 15 Floodgate, it is currently doing 23% of my damage. So when the game doesn't register this proc, it can be a fairly significant damage loss and a pretty big setback due to some of the ways that the hero talent interacts with the class. So for example, if I sit here and I spend a good bit of energy, so as I climb up to about, we're at 190, if I roll over to a new target and spin, it's not going to proc the strikes, but it did consume the energy. Now this is fairly easy to replicate, as you clearly just saw right here. And so the problem that I really have is that when you enter or you're chain pulling or you enter combat with new mobs and you're at like 220 energy, 230 energy, and you have to Keg Smash to get Shuffle active, to get Threat, it just instantly consumes the energy you spent, starting it over, which can be really, really problematic in some instances. Now, a controlled Brewmaster will obviously do their best to alleviate this, making sure that they get plenty of time in combat with a mob before actually trying to expunge their Flurry Strike charges, but sometimes it just doesn't happen. And so this is a pretty massive damage loss, and you lose out on Wisdom of the Wall buff, which can be devastating. You also lose against all odds, which is a massive agility bonus, so it can really be a big setback. Now, this has been a bug, or an interaction, if you want to call it that, since this hero talent's been introduced. I'm hoping that in the future that Blizzard addresses this and figures out a way for it to proc regardless if there's a target in range or not, because when you don't have a target in range or a mob just entered combat and isn't registered in the game yet because the tick rate or whatever, however the game fucking works, it just doesn't proc. So this is probably my biggest annoyance. You'll often hear me on stream kind of raging under my breath that it's not procking and it's triggering. Anyways, next, something else that I really hate about Brewmaster currently is the very underwhelming capstones. It is very common to see some type of build that plays none of your capstone talents. Taking a jump over to Murloc.io, this is a heat map of the current top 50 Brewmaster monks in Mythic Plus. As you can see here, we often opt out of every single thing. I am currently playing 2, and it's probably because I logged off in a raid build, so it's saying that I'm playing these, though I'm technically not. And that's often the case. In Mythic Plus, these capstone talents are pretty much dog shit and dead in the water. Now this will change in 11.2. Both Call to Arms and Chi Surge have their place for both of the hero talents respectively, but even then the Ox Stance node down here is kind of trash, if that makes sense. Black Ox Adept is almost never played. You'll never ever have a scenario where you need more Ox charges. Heightened Guard is also a very finicky thing to play around. So what it does is it reduces the trigger condition for Ox Stance, reducing it from 60% of your max health down to 40, but this condition is very, very specific. Like, for example, it would only affect or be useful in keys between like level 12 and 15, and as soon as you get above 15, you don't need to run it anymore, and if you're running anything below like a 12, and I'm just making these numbers up, but anything below a 12, there's no reason to run it either. So this corner of our tree and also Call to Arms and Chi Surge haven't really had a place up to this point in the War Within expansion. It's going to change a little bit going into the next patch, but still our capstones are just terrible. Kind of playing off the Ox Stance charges or the Ox Stance nodes as well. The third thing that really bugs me about the class is how vague some of our talents are. So for example, Ox Stance. You cast Purifying Brew, gives you charges of Ox Stance, makes sense. It's based on your stagger level, but it doesn't indicate in the talent how that operates. So you have to kind of know what that means, and it's going to work similar to something like Purifying Brew, which also isn't that clear. Now, for those, again, who don't know, your stagger level will change based on how much the damage over time effect is based on your current max health. So I'm in green stagger right now. So when I purify, I'm going to gain 1 stack of Purify Chi. And if I was playing Oxdance, I would get 1 stack of Oxdance as well. But that's not clear in the tooltip, so that's frustrating. But beyond that, when you take damage that is greater than 60% of your current health. So current health, you can assume, is kind of based on your actual, not your total health. So right now I have about 18.5 mil. But if I'm at like 4 mil, if it's 60% of 4 mil, then it would reduce the damage that I'm taking, or it would stagger more. Again, not super clear in the tooltip. And is it pre-stagger? Is it post-stagger? So what does this actually mean? And then beyond that, it says it increases the amount you stagger. What is that number? It's so infuriating. Now, of course, we know that this number is roughly 17% with some diminishing returns involved, but we have to, like, you know, the Brewmaster sim lords and theory crafters have had to go through extensive research to figure out what that number actually is, when Blizzard could just tell us what that is. And so it's a little frustrating that these talents are extremely vague. It's similar to Zen State. Effectiveness of your stagger is increased up to 20% based on your missing health. Is it a 20% increase on what our stagger is? Is it a flat 20%? When does it kick in? And how much percent do we get per missing health? So these types of things just like aren't super clear. Now, I think that's something that they could replicate in some of these talents, is something like Flow of Chi. You gain bonuses based on your current health. Now, they could easily have said at high health, movement speed increased, and at like mid, I don't know, like they could have just used some weird jargon, but they lay it out clearly for us. At 90% health or above, you gain movement speed. Between 90 and 35, you have a DR, and when you're below 35%, you have healing increased. This makes sense. This is a good tooltip that people can read and understand. Yes, it's a little wordy, but it's much better than like this weird vagueness of our talents. So that was kind of a rant, but I wish they were more clear cut about how, and this isn't just Brewmaster. I think there's a lot of classes that need an improvement on their tooltips. All right, my next big annoyance is mostly just simply the fact that Chi Burst will get delayed when you're casting it based on auto attacks that you're taking. And this can be extremely frustrating in Mythic Plus. When you're, when you have 8 mobs hitting you or 10 mobs hitting you and you're trying to get your big burst of damage off, whether you're playing Shado-pan or even more so as Master of Harmony, the fact that it gets delayed constantly from attacks is extremely frustrating. I think an instant cast would make sense, but I think simply Blizzard could just make it where you don't get delayed cast on this. Just make it a flat 1-second cast. I think they could also do something interesting where they can make it like an instant cast based on procs. I just think Chi Burst needs a slight update if it's going to be so impactful to the Master of Harmony playstyle, because getting delayed on cast is like super inconsistent. It's close to a 1.5-second cast, and unlike things like Demolish and Feldev, which makes sense to cast because they're kind of a defensive and a really big offensive, Chi Burst is almost feels more rotational, and the fact that you just get delayed on it really slows down the rhythm of the class in the way that it feels in Mythic Plus, and that's actually a big reason why I don't like playing Master of Harmony. All right, next we have Keg Smash Sucks, dude. Keg Smash is like the worst tank AoE ability in the game. I'm playing Shado-pan right now, and I did cast it 1 time, and it did a good bit of damage, but so did this random passive thing that's happening naturally from this new stomp. And so like I just casted Keg Smash twice more, and or I guess it only, for some reason, is tracking 1 of the hits. But basically, Keg Smash is super weak. There's a lot of times at the end of a run where Keg Smash is my 3rd, 4th, 5th, sometimes 6th, even 7th, like, ability on my kind of ability breakdown, especially when you're playing Master of Harmony. And for it being the thing that's supposed to generate the most amount of threat, and it's the thing that's supposed to get our shuffle active in combat, a way that we can engage with mobs, it's just terrible. It's like the fucking worst ability. Make Keg Smash strong again, please. Now, the only way, I mean, there's a couple of things I think they need to do. I think making it a 20-yard range will be a big improvement, and they just need to up the damage. That's it. I think it should just be upped, or it shouldn't do reduced damage beyond a certain amount of targets, because once you get into bigger pulls, it also feels really bad to hit. So yeah, just make Keg Smash great again. I don't really know what else to say. Give it a slightly bigger range, maybe increase the threat on it, but this has to be improved. Something that's really funny about the current state of Brewmaster as well is our raid buff. So we provide Mystic Touch, which for those who don't know, gives everyone who's hitting the target 5% increased physical damage. And so this is obviously really good for things like warrior, things like rogue, certain specs of like hunter, for example. Obviously melee swings for most melee DPS. But what's just so funny to me is that even as a Shado-pan monk, which is obviously the more physical-based monk compared to Master of Harmony, where you're doing a lot of nature damage through Vitality and Chi Burst and Harmonic Surge with our new tier set. Even when we're playing Shado-pan, our Flurry Strikes, the majority of the damage that we're dealing is actually going to be shadow damage. So we're buffing ourselves kind of not a lot. So let me get through this Weapons of Order window, and then I'll show you my breakdown. But it's kind of just funny, in my opinion. Especially if you get a lot of shadow damage procs, then it's just like doesn't actually matter. But if we look, you can see here that in this obviously very short sample size or small sample size, this is 40% of my damage in a given pull in a cooldown window. And so like, what's the point of having a physical damage buff if we're doing a majority of our damage as shadow, as fire, as nature? And so I'm hoping that I don't mind the Mystic Touch rebuff or like the Mystic Touch buff. I think it's good when Monk does a majority of their physical damage or as their damage as physical. But I think something they could do is remove the buff, because I think it's often cringe. Like if you were building a raid comp or even a Mythic Plus comp, and you had the choice between a Mystic Touch buff, not in regards to like the tank you're playing, but if you had the option for 5% more physical damage or 3% more magical, most of the time the 3% more magical actually ends up being better than the 5% fizz for how little classes actually do a physical damage. Again, you have your outliers like your warriors and outlaw rogue specifically, but when you start getting into like sub or assassination rogue, they're doing a heavy amount of nature and magical damage. When you get into things like DK and stuff, it's all like shadow damage, it's frost damage. When you get into feral druid, I guess it's mostly bleeds there. That's a bad argument. Long story short, I think Mystic Touch is kind of outdated, and they either need to bring back physical damage profiles with either this class or other classes, or what they need to do is give us a buff like Legacy of the Emperor. This was a buff way back in the day that gave people main stat. Now, don't get me wrong, it was really overpowered. It was 5% main stat. They could easily tune it down to like 1% main stat, but imagine monks bringing that instead of Mystic Touch. I think generally you'll just be fine with it, or maybe 2% main stat. I think that would be good, and that would kind of equal out. Okay. So I was complaining this about on stream the other day. It's very obnoxious, but this new Mighty Stomp talent, or I guess it's called Improved Niuzao, however you want to say it. This is a new knockup, a new form of CC that is tied to our cow cooldown, which is very cool. Very good. So here's what I find really annoying about this new Mighty Stomp cast, is that it's contingent based on where your cow is positioned. So if I pull a couple of these mobs here and I spawn my cow, and he's fine here, but let's say he actually runs over here and I go to hit the ability and these guys are like casting, it only knocks up the mobs that are around the Black Ox. So you kind of have to do this insane micromanagement. And this doesn't really matter as much, but let's say I'm mid pull and I go to like roll over here to get this next pack pulled in. But let's say this guy's a caster and then my cow randomly is over here hitting this mob as he's like trying to get his way in. And I go to like CC because there's a bunch of shit going on over here. He's only going to knock up this single mob. And it's honestly, it's like extremely frustrating to have to deal with that. And so it's like, cool, yeah, we have an additional form of CC in our kit, but quite frankly, it's not worth the point, because even when you play it, you have to almost micromanage your pet. Ultimately, this won't actually affect a lot of people. I don't know a lot of cases where you're going to actually look at your composition that you're running in Mythic Plus and be like, oh, I'm going to spend a point on this instead of anything else in the lower part of our tree. But then even if you are playing it, you have to be aware of your mob's positioning. Now, there's an easy fix, and I've mentioned this in a previous video, and some people had a question about it, but all you would do is you'd come into your macros and you would add /pet attack as one word, so your pet is always attacking your primary target, and that way you can consistently knock mobs up. But it's obviously still a pretty bad form of CC. It's technically tied to a 2-minute cooldown, both with your main CD as well as when you pair it with Weapons of Order when you're playing Call to Arms. So overall, it's not super enticing, and it's one of the most annoying things. Now, I think an easy fix that Blizzard could do is while you have the Black Ox active, you're able to recast it again, which will knock mobs up around your character and not around your pet, which I think is the easiest fix that they could do. Will they do it? Probably not. It would actually be more of a quality of life change. All right, next. Press the Advantage is fucking dog water. So Press the Advantage was a talent that was added back in Dragonflight, and it was kind of added as a pseudo band-aid fix to kind of fix the bloat complaint that a lot of people had about the class. It was super, super interesting because what it did is it basically made you have weapons of order kind of active often and like all the time. So the way that weapons of order works obviously ramps up the damage that you're dealing every time you hit a mob with Keg Smash or Rising Sun Kick. Now Press the Advantage, instead of doing that, gives you a damage dealt buff for 20 seconds, stacking up 10 times. That gives you 1% increased damage every time you successfully auto attack. Now what's also cool about this is it lowers your brews every time you auto attack as well. So this is like, it's really cool for like brew reduction, getting more celestial brews, getting more purifies, and it's kind of giving you steady damage and you don't have to worry about a cooldown. I love this ability. I wish it was still good. The reason it's not good is because it doesn't interact really with anything in our class kit. On top of that, the biggest spit in the face was when Blizzard introduced our new tier sets for patch 11.2, and the Master of Harmony trigger requires you to Tiger Palm. Now, if you don't know anything about Press the Advantage, what it does is it replaces your Tiger Palm. And so your main like auto attacks are basically Tiger Palming, but this doesn't have any interaction with like anything in these kits. It doesn't proc Overwhelming Force. It couldn't even proc the tier set. Now, Blizzard has recently changed it to be able to proc the tier set. Now, of course, it's still bugged. It's bugged and it consumes all of your stacks, but it only does one instance of damage. So if it's working like it should maybe either consume all the stacks or it needs to consume on every auto attack. But currently it's only actually proccing when you hit the 10 stacks and then you cast Rising Sun Kick or Keg Smash. So it's kind of rough. And the other problem with like Press the Advantage is it doesn't interact with things like Facepalm. It still reduces it by 0.5 seconds, but it won't also have the benefit of Facepalm, which is really obnoxious. It doesn't make your auto attacks have an attack modifier based on Facepalm or any other contingency like Counter-Strike. And so it's just a really shitty talent. Now, I'm going to be doing a video in the near future talking about ways I think they can make Press the Advantage better. But long story short, it's really shitty that it's still in our tree. Either remove it or make it work. Right now, they kind of keep like throwing band-aids on top of a band-aid fix that already happened way back in Dragonflight, and it's terrible. Now, again, if you play Press the Advantage, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just such a significant loss that any serious player is probably avoiding running this despite maybe wanting to. But I'll get to that in a future video. Well, we're still on the topic of talents. There are some dead talents in our tree still that I cannot stand. Whenever I open up my talent page, it like actually makes me sad. So first off, they are, for some reason, they decided to keep Staggering Strikes in as a choice node now with Quicksip. Now, Quicksip, for those who know, is really good. It's actually a really powerful talent. Now, unfortunately, it's competing with a lot of other good talents and are kind of the top of our tree, our tier 1. So chances are not a lot of players are going to opt in to play this if they can get points further down in the tree, but it's also not a bad defensive pickup. 5% stagger is actually kind of insane, especially later on in the tier. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some people playing with Quicksip. But when you have a 5% reduction on your stagger versus a flat damage amount based on an attack power every time you blackout kick, clearly the percentage-based one is going to scale so much better into high-end content. Now, Staggering Strikes is probably okay if you're doing world content, but you also don't even need to remove stagger when you're doing world content because you're just not taking a lot of damage. So there's just no reason for this to still be in the tree. The other thing that I really, really hate to see is that this thing, Fluidity Emotion, is also still a choice node. Like, no one is playing this talent. It's not useful. The reason why is because Shadowboxing Treads increases the damage of your blackout kick and makes it cleave. So you're getting extra, you're basically getting AoE or 3-target cleave in this case, and you're getting a damage increase. Now, Fluidity Emotion takes it back to a baseline level and then reduces its damage by 10% and also reduces its cooldown by 1. Now, the rotation naturally feels better when you have a 4-second cooldown on Blackout Kick versus a 3. When you have a 3-second cooldown, you're still probably going to be sitting on the cast for a second or two, even more so now because it has a reduced cooldown. And so it doesn't make sense. It doesn't cleave, it does less damage, and yes, you can technically get more Blackout combos with it, but the only time this is ever useful is in like a pure patchwork scenario where you only care about blackout combo going Shadowboxing Treads into a basically a Tiger Palm, like empowered with Facepalm and Counter-Strike. But it's more often than not just a massive damage loss compared to Shadowboxing Treads. So why it exists still, I have no idea. Don't even make it a choice node. I don't know. Like it makes me mad seeing this every time. Now, there's a couple of other talents in the tree, but nothing that's like anything that's like actually makes me upset to look at, like August Blessing, don't really care. Things like Strike at Dawn, again, also don't really care for extra elusive brawler stacks, even though I don't really think you need them. And obviously the Oxdance nodes, but I've already talked about that, and I don't want to keep beating a dead horse. Okay, similar to the Keg Smash issue that I have in terms of like threat, spinning Crane Kick is so bad. It's so bad. It sucks that there's times where if you pull large enough, spinning crane kick becomes viable at like 10 plus targets. But until then, it's really not that great. So if I go and I pull 3 packs here, and I'm gonna like Keg Smash, and then I'm gonna just start spinning. I'm gonna spin a couple times here. But you're gonna notice that like my damage is also not gonna be that crazy. So I'm just spinning pretty much over and over again and kind of weaving. But now I'm energy starved because I'm just spamming an energy spender. But you can see that it's really not doing that much damage. Like despite casting spinning crane kick double the amount of times as Keg Smash, it's barely doing enough damage, which is really, really frustrating. You have to pull a very large amount of trash. Outside of granting shuffle, it's not really benefiting anything from your kit outside of maybe Counter-Strike, which you're always going to have active in a key generally during combat. It does pair well with things like Charred Passions, making it a little bit stronger because you're getting 50% more damage on it technically. But outside of that, spinning crane kick doesn't offer you much defensively compared to things like Tiger Palm, which reduces your bruise, and Keg Smash, which reduces your bruise and does more AoE damage per cast done. And so it's kind of been causing issues with threat because you want to hit it. It looks like it does a lot of damage when you like are spinning and you're hitting a bunch of mobs and you're seeing all these numbers pop up. You're like, oh man, I'm really getting threat here. But a Rep Paladin will come in here and cast 2 abilities and you're done. It threats, you're gonna be competing with threat now. And so in a vacuum, it looks like it does decent damage, but over the course of an entire key, and it's also based on pulse size, it's just so bad. It's just so bad. Like Blizzard needs to buff this in some kind of way or make some types of talents work with spinning crane kick. Not to mention that Master of Harmony actually also has overwhelming force, which will generally result in more damage by actually hitting your single target buttons and larger pulls. So I wish they would buff spinning crane kick in some caliber, and maybe not buff it, but give some type of talent somewhere where it increases the AoE damage it does, or it has some type of other defensive interaction with your kit or threat interaction with your kit that makes sense. Last but not least, we have Weapons of Order as a cooldown. Now, I will say this. I think Blizzard, with their new tier set, I think is making Weapons of Order a little bit more enjoyable to hit. So the reason that I hate Weapons of Order so much is that, and this is a common complaint or frustration with the class, is that when you look at something like Guardian Druid, Demon Hunter, Paladin, Warrior, any other tank, they have a big burst CD. Maybe the only other tank that doesn't is like Blood DK. You don't really have like good burst damage. I mean, you do with Tombstone and Bone Storm, but you have no cooldown that you hit and you just like start popping off. But Incarnation, Avatar, Avenging Wrath, Metamorphosis are all these buttons where when you hit them, you immediately feel more powerful, whether it's offensively or defensively. Now, something that I think Blizzard has done well is with the new tier set with Shado-pan specifically, when you hit Weapons of Order, you're going to have a good burst damage. The way the tier set works is that upon entering Weapons of Order, it'll immediately proc Flurry Strikes on your next attack. So I'm going to Keg Smash here, pop Weapons of Order, and then it's going to proc. But as you can see here, it's slowly ramping. You have to cast basically 3 Keg Smashes and a Rising Sun Kick. But even this target here, like, you have to basically ramp the cooldown. So when you hit Weapons of Order, in a general sense, it's going to take at least 10 to 12 seconds of your 30-second cooldown to get the full damage benefit from the cooldown. And it's really frustrating in keys where you roll into a pull and you can hit this button that should be good and should feel good to hit, but all you're gaining upon the first global is a Keg Smash reset and 9% mastery, which is terrible. Like it doesn't feel good to hit, and it takes time to get it going. And there's no talents that really build and make Weapons of Order stronger. There's things like the Paladin kit or even the Prot Warrior kit. It's really good to look at where they're getting either additional damage, they're getting reduced cooldowns on things, and they're getting like CDR, or they're getting some type of proc or something. But with Brewmaster, like you're getting maybe a little bit on-demand damage when you pop it, but it's so low. Like it doesn't really do a lot of damage when you actually hit it. Chi Surge ends up being like only a 1 or 2% damage gain over the course of a key. And yes, it reduces the cooldown of Weapons of Order per target hit, but that's only up to 20 seconds. And so that doesn't feel super great either. And then Call to Arms, like, yeah, you're spawning your cow now, which again, they have improved a good bit. But again, it doesn't make the cooldown feel any better to hit when you spawn a cow. Like, you don't notice it when it's active. And It's like the biggest frustration, because when you hit Avatar, or you hit Wings, or you hit Meta or Incarn, like all of these tanks, when you hit this button, you feel invincible. That's not the case with Brewmaster. You can easily die right after you pop Weapons of Order. The 9% Master is not going to save you, nor is the damage gain. So maybe Blizzard will fix it. In an ideal world, they add some type of DR with Weapons of Order, I think. I think adding like a 10% or a 20% DR with this could be fine. Having it maybe proc a random defensive for you as well, like maybe procking a 6-second dampen harm or a 6-second fortifying brew could also make the class feel better when you pop weapons. Having the damage be reliant on your own character casting the spells versus anything else. So for example, when I roll in and I proc this, you're going to see this damage gain is actually being applied to the mobs, which then if I roll over here and start hitting these mobs instead, I have to start the cooldown over. And that's also just terrible. So tying it maybe to your actual character instead, tying it to maybe a buff here, would just make more sense. Like, I don't know. It's a terrible cooldown when you start chaining pulls together, because then all of a sudden you're doing more damage to some mobs versus others. There's a lot they can do with this tree. I'm going to be doing a video in the very near future talking about it. I have some interesting ideas. But for now, I'm going to leave it at that. So this has been all of the things that I really don't like about Brewmaster Monk, though I still really like the class and I like playing it. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you hate. Let me know if you agree with what I said in this video here, and I will catch you all in the next one. Peace.